I never fucked anybody over in my life. Didn't have it coming to me. You got that? All I have in this world is my balls and my word. And I don't break them for no one. Do you understand?
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
I work for Kaiser Soze.
Tu me déçois énormément.
I work for Kaiser Soze.
Je suis colère, les enfants, je suis colère.
Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Admit One. I'm your host, Jim. Today, we're going to be talking about the king of the monsters, Godzilla. Most of you know who Godzilla is. To me, Godzilla, I've always been a lifelong fan of Godzilla. More so King Kong, but my brother was more into Godzilla than I was, but he was always a major part of our lives. That's what we would do. That's one of the things, one of the movies that we'd always watch over and over again were Godzilla movies. So we're going to be talking today just about, I called them singular Godzilla movies, and what I mean by that is where it's either just Godzilla or it's starting a new period. So with the Godzilla movies, there's 3 different periods, maybe 4 now with the new one. And each one kind of restarted itself or rebooted, if you will, with a new one. So that's what we're going to be talking about, those. Either singular Godzilla ones or the ones that restarted the period. And of course, the first one would be Godzilla from 1954, the original. I don't know if it's the original quote-unquote kaiju movie, but it definitely kick-started the love of that genre for everyone, really. When I was researching this episode, I watched every single Godzilla movie. I originally just wanted to kind of pick and choose and just talk about those ones, maybe ones that interest me the most. But as it went on, I was like, no, I need to watch them all. I have the Godzilla Criterion DVD, and I'd had it for about a year. I just hadn't watched it yet. And this was the first time I had actually seen this movie. You know, you have clips on it in Godzilla 1984, but I had honestly never seen the whole movie. And there's 2 different versions of it. There's obviously Godzilla, which you can watch on the Criterion with subtitles. It's the original Japanese version. And then there's the highly edited American version, which is called Godzilla King of the Monsters. And what I like about this one is even though it's a cheaply made kaiju movie from Japan, obviously, it's a very serious movie. It's very earnest. It almost feels not part of the entire series. Even though this movie plays into every single other Godzilla movie, it kind of stands out on its own. And what I thought was interesting, because my perception of how Godzilla was created was completely different than what this movie proposes. You know, the nuclear blast didn't create him as in 1998 it did, but he was living the whole time. The nuclear bombs are what drove him out of his home and to the surface. And what I like about it is it's almost like a classic monster movie where you don't see it right away. You know, he invades that village and it's raining really bad and they wake up to the destroyed village and the footprints everywhere, and then the scientists come out and with their radio gear and stuff like that. But you don't see him for a while. And the first time you do really is when he peeks his head up over that ridge. And even though this was made in 1994 and probably less than, you know, what some actors make for a minute of their time, the effects really stand up. And, you know, once he makes his landfall, it's really like a dire situation, you know, once he kind of appears, the city council or government council or whatever, they're not, it's like no big deal to them. They're like, oh, shit, he's finally here. You know, do we tell people? Like, that's their main issue is, do they tell the people or not? Not how to kill it, not how to deal with it. It's, do we tell these people or not? And the professor actually states that he wants to study it. But at the same time, he makes that oxygen bomb, which, spoiler alert, eventually kills Godzilla, which was a big surprise to me with my knowledge of Godzilla 1984. And what I thought was cool, and I love this, is once they finally detonate that bomb, he straight up turns to bone. And that skeleton plays into a few other movies later on, which I really liked. I like those nice little throwbacks like that. And his breath is more like a heat breath. I know that's a point of contention with Godzilla fans, and the TriStar version from 1998 is he doesn't have his atomic breath. But in this one, it's not really, and maybe it's a lack of effects at the time. But to me, it was more like a fire breath in this anyway, or heat breath. It was not atomic breath or the friggin' laser breath from Shin Godzilla at all. So I think that's kind of interesting. Maybe some people kind of forget the original in that manner. There's so many other ones that this one kind of maybe gets lost in their memory. And of course, we had so many after that, but the next real one for this episode would be Godzilla 1984. And really, this is my Godzilla movie. This is what we watched more than anything when we were growing up. Really, like, and when I think about it, our Godzilla time where we were really into him was kind of a short period. I guess maybe because where kids' time seems to pass slower. I really don't know. So when I'm going through these, like, by the time we were really out of Godzilla, like, it was ready to reboot with Godzilla 2000. But we only knew a small number of the Godzilla canon. So Godzilla 1984, like, when we would watched it before, but when, like, we were actually able to watch it more and more was when the first American version came out. I remember going to Target with my dad for my brother's birthday, because like I said, he was more into Godzilla than I was. And we got this 5-pack VHS set with a couple of the original movies. And that was really the first time you could really pop in, at least for us, to pop in Godzilla 1984 and just watch it whenever you wanted to. But when we were little, this movie gave me nightmares. Like most monster movies from my youth, it straight up scared me. Especially when Godzilla finds that drunk in the building, at least from the American version. And it's a similar nightmare to when Godzilla finds, I can't think of her name, what's her face, in the bar in Godzilla 76, or King Kong 76, and pulling her out of there while Jeff Bridges is making the phone call. It's kind of a similar scene to that. That's what really scared me, was the fact that here's this monster, you're helpless, and he is about to kill you. And I remember seeing the flashback scenes in this and wondering if it was the first one, or if they really just reshot some scenes for it, to kind of give it some backstory. So it's kind of neat going back through this, like I said, and watching the first one again. This one has always been weird to me because with what I now know as limited knowledge of Godzilla, he's always been the good guy to me. But for a vast majority of these movies, he is not. So having these other movies where he is the good guy, and then you have this one where he's the bad guy, it kind of throws your emotions as a kid into a little bit of a blender. You're like, wait a minute, I thought he was good. Why are they trying to kill him? Is he just misunderstood? Are they scared? What's going on? So I always had trouble, reconciling that. And, the version we always grew up with is the American version, Godzilla 1984. But that's not the real version. And going through this, rewatching these, I think I have 3 versions of this movie now. So this was right. It took me so long to watch all these that Kraken Releasing had just come out with their DVD and Blu-ray of Godzilla 1984, or as it's more well known anywhere else, Return of Godzilla. So when I popped in that DVD, I had no idea what I was watching, because it's technically the international version, which it's still dubbed, but it's a completely different movie. Like, scenes are reworked. I guess I had no idea that there was rights issues with this, which is the reason why it's not available, or wasn't as readily available on DVD as the other ones. My brother had actually asked for a bunch of Godzilla movies for his birthday one year, and he's like, I want Godzilla 1984, and I was like, well, I can't find it anymore. So he pointed me in the direction of this website, which I won't say here because I realized what it is way later. And they were selling the movie, so I bought it for him, not really realizing it until he popped it in, and it's just basically a burnt DVD. Obviously a pirated copy. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't until he visited not too long ago and brought his movies to borrow that he informed me of this. And at that time, they had just announced pre-orders for it, so I wasn't able to pick it up quite yet, but I eventually did and watched it and was like blown away by these two completely separate movies. It's like a different viewing experience. And this one, just like the originals, it rises to the top because it's such a well-made movie. Like his first landfall with that POV shot through the clouds is amazing. It's really a return to form for me. Watching the first one and kind of more or less eventually going in order of release, I was so stuck on how good the original was that once we get to this one, it's like, here we go. Now we're back into the swing of things where he is now really realize what he is either a bad guy or a misunderstood creature. But back to the international version, it's much darker and it's more tense. There's actually an escalating nuclear threat between the U.S. and Russia, which is at that time in the midst of the Cold War. So I would imagine that's why in the U.S. version it's cut down a little bit, because it makes Russia seem like not so much a good guy, but they're trying to divert nuclear disaster, whereas in the 1984 version, he purposefully launches that missile that creates that beautiful sky over Tokyo and knocks out the Super X. It's interesting too, like when you see these, Terminator did it as well, which really bothers me. I can't find the original. Like when they started re-releasing these DVDs and Blu-rays, like the gun sounds are completely different. So when you grow up with this one sound that you're so familiar with, and now all of a sudden it's different, it kind of takes you right out of it. And in this one, his roar is different in the international version. It's more monster-like. I almost like it better, but I'm so used to the other one, and playing with the toys all the time and making that noise or trying to mimic it, that it takes me right out of it. And really the only major difference is the absence of Raymond Burr, who popped up in the American version of Godzilla. So I'm always used to that, and the Dr. Peppers everywhere, and everything else. So I would say out of the Toho ones, it's hard to say. This is, sometimes depending on my feelings, it's either my favorite or my second favorite. I'll talk about my favorite in part 2 of this, so it'll kind of be a surprise, and maybe you can guess what it'll be. But it's sometimes my first, sometimes my second favorite. So 1998 rolls around. America's finally like, we got to make our own Godzilla version. Who do we get to do this? How about we can have Matthew Broderick star in it? Perfect. I make fun of this movie, but I really like this movie. It's action-packed, it's entertaining, it's kind of funny. Its special effects are okay. Who better to direct a city-destroying monster movie than Roland Emmerich? He's like the king of destroying cities. That's what he's known for. So, like when a movie like 2012 rolls around and you're like, wait a minute, it's not directed by Roland Emmerich? Like, he's the guy to get. I don't understand the hate on this. I really don't. It's like, it would have been an entry in my Making the Case series where I talk about movies that are misjudged and misaligned. I get that true fans hate on it. That's cool. For a while, I was under the impression that Godzilla fans called him Gino, so Godzilla in name only. But in researching this, I found that they now call him just Zilla, But it's interesting. I guess, I don't know. You're entitled to your own opinion or whatever, but I think he's got a cool design. He's lean, he's mean, he's quick. He looks like an iguana because he came from an iguana. Like, he was created by the nuclear blast. That's what separates this one kind of from all the rest, is he was created by the nuclear blast as opposed to waking him up or trying to destroy him or whatever. And one of the things that people hated about this was his lack of atomic breath or whatever. But really, he's kind of got it when they're running around in the taxi cab afterwards, after they leave Madison Square Garden and he's pissed off. He gives him a dose of flame breath, kind of. It's not as predominant as, in the originals or in the remake or whatever, but it's there. Maybe in future installments he would have learned how to use it better. I would say, if anything, this is kind of like a new creature. Maybe it took him a while to get that big because he's the original. Obviously his kids were supposed to grow up fast, but whatever. What does bum me out, though, is they had planned for more sequels with other monsters. And I'm kind of bummed we didn't get more. There was a cartoon series afterwards. I don't think we ever watched it, but maybe they had more in that. But it would have been cool to see more of that. You could have definitely moved in a different direction. That's what they're doing with the new one anyway. They're totally not recasting, but they're getting new main characters. Kind of like, all right, well, people like this movie. Maybe we need to go in a little bit different direction, though. So it is what it is. In the Toho movies, like, all I want to see is the monster action. I don't really care about the human stories. In this one, I kind of do. I enjoy the human bits too, because there is so much, I don't know, humanity, I guess. There's some humor in it. They obviously get along. Their chemistry's good. I think a stupid argument for movies is like, oh, it's lack of humor. If it's not a comedy, that's a dumb excuse. If you didn't like a movie, there wasn't enough humor. It's not a comedy. But if it's in there and it works, sometimes when you shove humor in there, it's obvious. Like this one, it feels organic and nice. I do like the nice little jabs that they get in there, how they come about calling him Godzilla, and she's like, "It's Gojira, you moron." So I think that's kind of cool. Nice little throwbacks to the original. And this one always stood out to me because of all the Simpsons actors in it. It might as well have been cast by Matt Groening or James L. Brooks. And not showing Godzilla right away is a great move as well. Like I said just a minute ago, in the Toho ones, that's all I want to see are the monsters. Whereas in this one, I like the people, but it's a nice build-up. Even when he's on shore, like, you don't really see him right away. You don't see his head at all, basically. It's always, I want to say it's from everyone on the ground's POV, so you're kind of seeing, like, the chaos of it or whatever. Almost like how Steven Spielberg crafted War of the Worlds. Everything is from a human's POV, so you don't really, you're stuck with them, so you feel that emotion that they're feeling. That one does a better job of it, even though I'm not a big fan of that movie. It does a better job of making you connect with the characters in a film sense, I guess, or an artsy sort of sense, whereas that movie's held into a higher regard than this one. And it's almost action-packed from the get-go. You don't see him right away, but it's a basic Roland Emmerich movie. Once that roller coaster's going, you ain't stopping it. And I like how the radiation created Godzilla rather than awakening or killing him. I talked about it a minute ago. It at least attempts to set itself apart from the rest by saying, what if this nuclear energy created this, Godzilla's kind of been an allegory for, nuclear regulations, I guess, for lack of a better term. This one is not taken as seriously. Not that most of the Tohos are, but, what if our, the waking him up or trying to kill him is kind of like, it's not as powerful an allegory as what if we did this and it creates something else, We need to put ourselves in check. Along with Fight Club and like I said in the David Fincher episode, along with that, this movie and Mortal Kombat, I could probably recite it line for line. I've watched it that many times. This is also a good rainy day movie. Like I talked about, Panic Room is a good rainy day movie. This one is too, because a lot of it takes place when it's raining. Godzilla loves the rain. So I was talking about time frames earlier. This one came out in the midst of our Godzilla love. But by Godzilla 2000, like, I didn't even care to see that one at all. So it kind of goes to show how time flies differently when you're a kid, because by 1998, we're full Godzilla mode. You know, we're excited to see this. We're buying toys. They're re-releasing videos from the Tohos and things like that. But 2 years later, I could give two shits. I've since come around and been like, you know what? I do appreciate those movies. That's part of my childhood. That's what I like watching. They're fun to watch. I read some reviews of these things, and I'm like, what do you people expect when you come into these? You know, it's more, especially the Toho ones, like, I don't know what you're expecting. They have these too high of expectations to kind of fully enjoy these movies. Maybe that's what this one needs too. You know, we had a bunch of toys for this, especially, and I just rebought it for my brother because I saw it at a trade-in place, which is a cup holder in the shape of Godzilla that I believe Taco Bell sold. And this was before cars had cup holders, you know, so you had to go and buy your own from Pep Boys or whatever, and they'd hang on the windowsill. This one didn't hang on the windowsill too well, but he was like, it would look like he's holding your cup, and he was nice and big, so you could hold your supersize, because they still had supersize back then. I don't know what he did with it, but he's got it somewhere. You know, we were excited for this. We were actually down in San Diego, because we used to go to San Diego every year as well. And we'd usually see at least one movie. Most of the time was spent doing things like SeaWorld and the zoo and things like that. But, you know, every once in a while we go see a movie, and this was one of them. I think this was a special occasion, though. I believe we were down there for, my mom was graduating from something. Maybe her master's or something like that. And so we went and saw Godzilla, and it's kind of funny because I always remember this, and she does too because she brings it up all the time. One of her classmates had decided to go see it as well. And this was hours after the ceremony. And she is still in her cap and gown at the movie theaters. I just think that's funny. I don't know why that sticks in my head, but it is. And it's surprisingly loaded with one-liners. You know, if maybe that's what you got to watch it for. It's the same with Batman and Robin. If you're not looking at like as a Batman movie or a Godzilla movie, maybe as a silly monster comedy, then maybe you'd have a better time watching this movie. Because again, I don't know why people disavowed this one. I've seen some theories, but really not a definitive answer. Is it because he doesn't breathe fire? Is it because he's a skinny lizard that can run? I really don't know. It's a shame, though. Maybe Matthew Broderick wasn't the right choice. I don't know. Whatever. But then 2 years later is Godzilla 2000, or Godzilla Millennium, depending on which part of the world you come from. And it's interesting, whenever I don't know if reboot's the right word, but they come into a new period, right? It always seems it does reboot the series. There's a new Godzilla design, it's an updated time period, but all of them have one thing in common. The original is still canon. So when you come into the Millennium period, Godzilla from 54 is still like its predecessor. Like they're still reeling from that attack 50, 60, 70 years later, or 20 years later if you're in 1984. But in the Millennium series, you know, Godzilla 1984 doesn't apply. You know, they're never discovering him for the first time, with the exception of Shin Godzilla. They're never discovering him for the first time. He's always been there. He's always been a part of their lives. He always made landfall in Tokyo in 54, which is kind of cool. It pays homage to the original, while at the same time making their own universe. And this one dumps you right in the middle of an attack. Like they're like the Godzilla news agency, and they're trying to track Godzilla and track his movements and predict his movements and things like that. And what's cool about these ones sometimes is its marriage of practical effects and digital effects. It works sometimes. Sometimes you're like, oh my god. Like when we start talking about the other movies in the series, sometimes they're very cringeworthy. This one's not too bad. They use it sparingly. It's not like they do fully create, some creatures, but it's always a crutch, but not in a bad way. It's always like, okay, we can't have a guy in a suit do this, or let's spice this scene up, or let's tweak this to make it blend a little better. That's what they use it for. And like I said, the first Godzilla is always continuity, but they never really explain how he went from being dead to not dead. I think maybe sometimes they say, because they do talk about his skeleton, and some of these his skeleton makes an appearance, or is a main fucking character. That would lead me to believe that maybe there's eggs at the bottom of the sea, or maybe there's just a couple of these living at the bottom of the sea, and they just come up every once in a while for air. This one's kind of weird, though. I would have preferred if it was just a Godzilla standalone, because he literally fights a UFO. It turns into a monster later, but I don't know. This one kind of has a superior design to the previous ones, but he changes throughout these ones, whereas the ones following Godzilla 1984, they're basically the same design, but in this one it changes from movie to movie, basically. It is a superior design, but, at the end of this one, it's kind of funny because they ask why he's protecting them, but then he proceeds to firebomb the city, so they're like, oh, well, maybe he's not. So, I don't know, this one's, it starts off, they probably did a good idea of stopping the Millennium period after Final Wars, especially after Final Wars, and kind of just sitting on it for a little bit. But in 2014, we got our second Godzilla movie here in the States. And of course I was excited for this one too. Even though I'm kind of moved past Godzilla at this point, he's still a big part of my childhood. I'm still excited to see him. I didn't like it the first time around. It's got a similar opening to 98, with the flashback footage, but they change it a little bit, like they're trying to kill Godzilla now. They've known those creatures existed. Now they're trying to blast him out of the sea as opposed to creating him. And in 98, they do a good job of waiting to reveal Godzilla. In this one, you don't see enough of him, and it would always cut away when there's some cool shot. I don't know. That always bothered me. Like I said, I didn't like this when it first came out. I was very disappointed. I waited until my brother came to visit us to go and see it in the theater, and he loved it. But I was just let down. I've since moved past that. I'm excited to watch it. Some people still think it's kind of boring, but I have a deeper appreciation for this one now. I dig the fossils at the beginning. When that mine collapses because they're digging and they come across that cave. I do dig that. I love shit like that, like the bones that they find from the original Godzilla and the Toho ones. That's just something that always interests me. What I want to know is, are they Godzilla fossils, or were they some other prehistoric beasts? Maybe they are the skull crawlers that John C. Reilly calls them in the new King Kong, and maybe that's what they are. I don't know. We're only left to speculate at this point why those two fight coming up. But we'll talk about that a little later. I didn't buy it right away once it came out on video. I waited almost like a year. I think Black Friday had it for like $10. I was like, you know what? I'm going to get it. So I watched it, and like after it was over, I immediately wanted to watch it again. And I don't know why. It's kind of cool in the fact that Godzilla is truly a good guy from the get-go. We don't realize it right away as a government or a species or whatever, but he is there to destroy and defend us from those creatures. But I do have to ask, when they go to Nevada because they're looking for the other one because they have it stored in that mountain, did no one hear it breaking out of the mountain in the first place? None of the workers were like, hey, what's that sound? I can hear kids playing across the street. There's no way they didn't hear a giant mountain disintegrating from a giant creature, which were interesting, by the way. I didn't expect him to fight other monsters right away. I thought this was going to be like a standalone movie with just him. And then later on, if this was a hit, kind of like what they were going to try to do with 1998, is set this up. If it's a success, then we'll have other creatures come in, because obviously they had the rights for it. It was reported while they were making it. But I didn't expect him to fight it right away. I kind of like that that they made their own creatures, kind of. They're not bad looking. They're kind of boring, but they sound great. It's an interesting sound that those creatures make. So we'll see what the future has to hold and what different designs Godzilla King of the Monsters brings. 2019? Next year? I don't know. I'd really like to know what purists think of this one. Obviously they hate 1998, but I haven't seen any really huge vitriol spilled at this one. Some people think it's boring. It can be at times. His feet are definitely stupid as far as the design is concerned, but I really want to know, like, I guess people like it since you can't readily find hatred for it. It got an okay Rotten Tomato score, which doesn't hold too much sway over me, but it is what it is. It does feel like a Toho Godzilla to me, though, in that there isn't a whole lot of monster action. But what is there is pretty exciting. Even if they cut away, when everyone's running into an underground bunker or whatever the case may be. But it's very kinetic, and both monster deaths make you jump up and scream. When he finally kills them, it's that kind of destruction that you say, yes! Fuck yeah, kill that guy, because he's ruining San Francisco. You know what I mean? And he does kill one of them with his atomic breath, which was kind of a mystery leading into it. And it's even portrayed that way in the movie, when he finally lights up those back plates. And you're like, oh, fuck, yes, here it comes. And it was actually ruined by a toy, I want to say in like a Burger King Happy Meal or something like that. And, but it was still like, it's up in the air. A toy design is not conducive to what's in the movie. I wish people, they're doing it a lot with Power Rangers now, which it did end up proving to be correct, but you can't judge what you don't see in a movie based on a toy or what it's rated or what you haven't seen. Like, how can you prejudge something like that? People were prejudging Ghostbusters before they even started making the fucking thing. You can't do that. You have to judge the movie on its own merits. So, whatever, it is what it is. I don't mind being spoiled sometimes by things, because to me, like, once I start that movie, I'm invested in everything else. I forget what's going on. And to me, sometimes it's the journey getting there, the twist or spoil or whatever doesn't mean anything if you don't know its importance. You know what I mean? Well, big deal. You know that Brad Pitt and Edward Norton are the same character in Fight Club, but you don't see his journey to that, so it means nothing if you don't know the twist. His first appearance is great. The water pulling out on the beach in Hawaii, and although I'm not sure what would cause that, it's kind of cool to kind of build up what's coming. what the shit is that? And then the flares shoot up, and you're following the flares, and then they come down and illuminate his body. That is how you reveal something, you know what I mean? Although his feet are stupid. Did I already say that? His feet are so dumb. They look like stubs, if he was in an accident and that's all that was left were those little claws and his stumpy feet. I'm glad they don't show him a lot because that's really dumb. The sound design is great in this movie. The performances are good, but there's really no character development, and that works fine for a movie like this. It's a fucking monster movie. I don't care. I am invested sometimes, because I do say that about 1998's Godzilla, but I want to see some monsters destroy things. That's basically why I'm here. I love monster movies. I want to see some monsters fight monsters. I want to see people try to destroy said monsters. I want to see monsters smash through cities and do whatever. That's one of my favorite genres of film is monsters. So at first, because he's fighting those Mutos in fucking San Francisco, which is not a sparsely populated city. Some of you, my friends on Twitter, know that. I've been there several times. It's not as populated as, say, New York, but it's still a bustling city, so there's plenty of city destruction. At first, I didn't like how Godzilla would be fighting something, and then they would cut away, or in the case of the San Francisco, the BART shelter would close. I still don't. It's not a good filmmaking choice. It may have worked on monsters because of your limited budget, but it doesn't work too well on this. You have a lot of money. Please show us what you're spending it on. But at the same time, that style of filmmaking is very subtle. It's not in your face. Like when you're looking at her when the parachutes come in and the jet crashes behind her. That shit's good. That's where he excels and stuff like that. Maybe not in his other filmmaking choices, but I think he matured a lot with Rogue One. Having said that, though, I'm kind of bummed that he's not going to be doing King of the Monsters. I don't like when movies replace directors when they're kind of going in a franchise mode. Obviously, it can work sometimes for, James Bond when they're kind of episodic, so each one's its own thing. And not that I'm not excited for this next one. I think Michael Dougherty will do an excellent job. It would have been cool to see Edwards continue this. Because he does have some cool stuff, like the military wreckage floating down the river. That train on fire is cool. The jets falling out of the sky. The halo jump. The train scene in the airport, which would be cool as a part of the tram ride at Universal Studios, the backlot tour. When I was growing up, it was the Mechanical Monster from like 76, and then of course that burnt down, and then they replaced it with Peter Jackson movie, which is still cool, but I think they've updated it since then, or they're about to. So that'd be cool to go through that, and then do the train scene from Godzilla. Obviously, Godzilla is not a Universal movie, but neither is the 76 King Kong, so, make that work, guys. What's interesting to me is that the action takes place on the West Coast. You see movies where a lot of people are in danger, and a lot of that takes place in New York, or Chicago, things like that. So that's kind of cool to see just a different location, I guess. I'm surprised they didn't take place more overseas, because I guess some of it, half of it really takes place in Japan. Not that it's boring at all, but it does take a long time to get to the Mystery of the Beasts, like almost an hour. Like when the first one wakes up from its cocoon and they find the one in Nevada, like that's almost an hour. And not a lot really happens in between that, as far as moving the narrative forward, I guess. I guess it's spent on character development, which is a bummer because, I don't mind Bryan Cranston dying. Some people will say, like, oh, you got rid of the best character in the movie, which is kind of true, but his death didn't serve a purpose, really. I wish it would have meant something, Maybe he was the one that knew about these creatures, which he kind of did, but the guy from Inception and Batman Begins knew more than him. So, like, really his role is unimportant. Maybe Aaron Taylor Johnson is the only one that knows how to kill Godzilla, but he doesn't want to because he's fighting with his dad, but then his dad's death motivates him to do other things. So that's what bums me out about him dying. It didn't mean anything. And it's almost like the mythology here is almost treated like something came before it, kind of like what Toho does with the original Godzilla. You don't hear much about Godzilla's biology or how he came to be or how he can survive that shit. but they obviously know something. So, and it's clear in now that King Kong's marketing has ramped up and it's now a week away from release that, or excuse me, a couple weeks, I guess at this point, when you hear this, it'll be a week or so. It's clear that they're going to dive more into that, which is neat. It's retconned, but it doesn't feel shoehorned in there. So those of you who have been to Hawaii, I want to know if you noticed anything interesting about their convenience stores when Godzilla first makes landfall there. And poor Golden Gate Bridge. You know, in this movie it gets destroyed, in X-Men it gets destroyed, Pacific Rim. It just can't seem to catch a break. Maybe they should make a movie where Golden Gate Bridge fights back. I don't know. But I'm looking forward to King of the Monsters. I hope it'll be a little more monster heavy. Hopefully they'll bring in some... I don't really care for Mothra, so I hope they kind of leave him alone, but maybe King Ghidorah would be cool. We'll talk about King Kong vs. Godzilla in part 2 of this, which will be after the King Kong episode, which will come after this. So my thoughts on that we'll talk about then. But Toho did recently release a Shin Godzilla movie, their newest one. And this was the first, the timing happened to work out great when I was watching all of these. It came to a theater by me, and so I was like, I got to see this. You know, I'm in the midst of this. I need to see this. And actually, this was the first Toho I've seen in a theater. You know, they've released other ones, but this is the first one. It was subtitles, which is not a problem to me. But in a movie like this, I kind of want to watch it dubbed. It's not a movie where, let's say, I need to experience the full artistic value of it. Any other movie like The Wailing, if they had a dubbed version of that, I would not watch it. I would watch the subtitled version. Brotherhood of the Wolf, it's subtitled all the way. Pan's Labyrinth is subtitled all the way. But a movie like this, I don't want to turn on my brain, for lack of a better term, so I want to hear it dubbed. So that was kind of interesting. And in this, the dialogue is rapid fire. It's almost like a Aaron Sorkin script. So people are talking quick, and you're trying to read quick while processing what's going on the screen. And it can be kind of a task, if you will, especially when you're not in a very comfortable seat. This wasn't the best theater to see it at, but it was the only one showing it, so it is what it is. It did manage to update it in a fun way. So, like, it's the first one where they're really rebooting it. And he's an organic creature. It doesn't appear that he is created by nuclear test in any way, at least yet. Maybe they'll do that in future installments. I'd like to see where they move forward from this. And it was interesting. I'm watching this thing. I'm watching previews for it, and I'm watching on the movie, and I'm like, is this suitmation? Is that a dude in a suit? And I couldn't tell, to be honest with you. Like, it's that... And it ended up being completely computer generated. They did mocap for it, and I say this as a compliment, like it was a sort of level in between super hyper realistic computer animation and suitmation where I didn't know, and I loved that portion or that aspect of the movie that I couldn't tell. And like everyone, you'll hear people talk about it. It was like Aaron Sorkin wrote this movie. Like, it's a West Wing with Godzilla in it. And what that does is manages to cram a lot of information about Godzilla into these creative montages. So they're figuring things out for the first time with you, and the way that they portray that really helps the movie along, and you figuring out where Godzilla came from, why he's doing this, why he's actually changing form. You know, I'm in my third and final form now. So that's what makes this one stand out from any other Godzilla movie in the series. And it's the first time in a long time, like I said, besides the American versions, where this wasn't a sequel to the original. Completely new. His backstory is new. Like, his powers are new. His look is new. But when he is in one of his forms, he's got these googly eyes, and I couldn't help but think he was like a stupid monster. Like at that point, like he's not scary to me. One of the things on this design that bothers me, I guess, is his tiny little arms. And one of his forms is he doesn't really have arms at all. He doesn't know how to use them, so he's like pushing himself along. And he has these googly eyes, and that's what made me think maybe it was suitmation, and maybe they did that on purpose, but that just, it made him less scary that way. But his look is like completely different, while at the same time respecting what Godzilla is. When he fires his breath, his mouth splits open, kind of like the, are they Reavers or Reapers from Blade 2? His bottom jaw splits open, and at first he shoots fire because he doesn't know what's going on. Kind of like what I mentioned in the 1998 Godzilla. Maybe he doesn't know how to use it yet. But at first he's spitting fire, and you're like, yeah, that's cool. And then it kind of turns into a blast. But then it's a frickin' laser, which is badass. It's a focused laser. And when he's done with it, like, it has to be recharged, which is cool. It's not unlimited power. Unlimited power! It's not it. That's not it. He's not the Emperor, which makes this one stand out. And what's cool is it's kind of, it's scientifically accurate. It's a fucking laser. It's purple because it's hot. If you think about Roy G. Biv, it's the violet. So that is the hottest thing. And it will cut through anything. And it shoots out of holes you didn't know he had, which is also cool. And his overall design is badass. His arms are still tiny to me. But once he gets in his final form, like, he is indestructible, basically. And that's what makes him scary. They do, like, they name check him. They're kind of naming him, and they're doing these kind of, like, Japanese pronunciation versus Americanized pronunciation. So that's kind of like a little tongue-in-cheek way of saying we're better than you are. It is a typical Toho Godzilla movie, though. There's a lot of talking and not a lot of Godzilla. But when he is there, his 4 different forms, which is something we've really never seen before in a Godzilla. Like, it is cool, and it's there's a countdown going on. Like, there's this sense of impending doom heading for these people, and that's what makes this scary again to me, really. Godzilla 1984 used to give me nightmares. Like, if I was little in Solace, it probably would give me nightmares too. And it shows things other Godzilla movies really haven't. Most notably, people dying. Like, a lot of people die in this. They get crushed. They're blown up. They are set on fire. They're lasered to death. Like, it's a pretty gritty movie. It takes itself very seriously, even though the cutaways when they're doing their sessions or whatever, it's a little bit lighthearted, but they're still talking about serious stuff. It's not these ridiculous things like some of the other Godzilla movies do. And it's like I said, it's dark and it's gritty, and it kind of brings Godzilla back to what he was to begin with. And they use the city against him. They, at the end, it's kind of a little bit fantastical, if you will, but that's how they defeat him. They use the city against him. They launch these trains into him and I guess end up freezing him or whatever, which once he does is defeated, I guess, even though he's still alive. It had some weird moments there, like his spines were, they had people poking out of him, which is odd. I don't know why. Maybe they'll cover that in later installments, but it was kind of interesting. This was probably how, like, if a monster really made landfall, this is probably how it would go in real life, to be honest with you. Like, it feels that authentic. I can't say really enough good things about it. Maybe the title change was a little weird. They went from Godzilla Resurgence, but then changed it to Shin Godzilla, but I don't know why. But I look forward to more installments from this version. So before we wrap things up, I want to do a little special segment here. I want to talk to my brother about his love for Godzilla. So let's listen to that. So I'm joined now by my brother Matt, who you heard on the Predator episode. Say hello, Matt.
Hello, everybody.
So I wanted to talk to you today because I'm doing the Godzilla episode, and you're arguably a bigger Godzilla fan than I am. So I just wanted to ask you a few questions. First, I guess, what is your earliest memory of Godzilla?
Earliest memory. Shoot, it's just like with the Predator one. It's can't really put a date on it, but I remember going down with Mom to Blockbuster, and we could rent a movie. And for some reason, I would always choose Godzilla. Any Godzilla versus movie, it didn't matter to me. But the collection they had, was very limited, so I always ended up picking the same 5 movies because that's all the 5 that they had. But I think the earliest memory is watching Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, and then Godzilla 1985. So that was the first time I remember as a kid just kind of watching those, picking out the movie, watching it over and over and over again, and then slowly progressed into watching them fight other monsters, and then branching out to the later years, the Godzilla 98, and then all the newer stuff now. So
why do you like Godzilla so much?
I don't know. I think as a kid, you just kind of latch on to the whole monster movie type of deal. It's like we're big fans of Predator, and going back a little earlier, people like watching monster movies like with the Wolfman and Frankenstein and the Mummy. So it's just something about him as a character. It was just something always cool to me as a kid, and just kind of appealed to my kid sensibilities, but especially with the toys. It's what every kid dreams of doing. You set up a fake town in your imagination, and you got this little action figure that you can just, tear apart in. And, he was always kind of the hero in every story. So it was just kind of a natural fit.
What would you say your favorite Godzilla movie is?
Oh, my favorite. I'd say the whole movie. Even though it scares me, I don't know why, but to this day, it would have to be Godzilla 1985. That's probably the one I've watched the most, but other Godzilla movies I have favorite parts in. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, when they wake up King Caesar, that was always a favorite. I always enjoyed watching that movie just because of that epic fight scene. I know you have some differences on that, but I just have different favorite parts from every Godzilla movie I've seen, but start to finish, Godzilla 1985 is hands down my favorite. And I still have nightmares about it too. Probably about once a month, he'll invade town, and then we all have to run for our lives. But I was always one like, why are we all running away from him? Let's run towards him and run around him. That way we don't have to be in his path of destruction. We can just hang out here until he leaves.
So you all noticed he said I had a differing view on King Caesar, which I'll talk about in part 2 of the Godzilla episodes, and maybe I'll have you back on, Matt, and we can discuss that. But I don't want to spoil anything right now. But yeah, our views definitely differ on that.
Well, I mean, I always thought he looked like a badass. It's just a giant fighting dog. I mean, what else would you want in a movie?
You'd think, but I'll definitely have you back on, and we can discuss this later. So,
I'll fight you right now.
What other Godzilla memories do you have?
Shoot, I remember we used to go down to San Diego a lot as we do our little family staycations, and remember 1998, what was his name? Matthew Broderick, that Godzilla movie came out, and I remember watching on the news. That was before like teaser trailers because YouTube wasn't invented back then. And it's like, oh, you saw Godzilla's foot, so it was just kind of, I remember going down there just being really, really excited and just anticipated this whole movie. It's like, this can be this awesome flick, and got down there and watched it, and I thought it was rad. And then, toys came out, you had the helicopter and the big Godzilla. So that was always a good memory as a kid. Being freaked out, at the beginning of Godzilla in 1985 with that giant sand flea. That sucker was 5 feet long, coming out and attacking that guy and being weirded out. And, we mentioned it before, going toy shopping with Grandpa. I remember one time we went out there and I bought he bought me, it was like a Godzilla monster smorgasbord, and like 5 or 6 different of his villains, and then 5 or 6 of his buddies, and then like 2 or 3 different versions of him. So just collecting toys as a kid. Remember getting the VHS. It was like a collector set. Mom bought me, I think, for Christmas one year for my birthday, but that one had Godzilla 1985. It had the original. Can't remember the name of it, but it was one when it was like on Monster Island with the giant spider. Rewatching those a bunch as a kid, just trying to absorb as much as I could.
Great. Well, is there anything else you want to add?
I would attempt to do his war, but my Godzilla impersonation isn't as par as my Arnold Schwarzenegger, so I'll leave that up to the listener's imagination.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. Like I mentioned, I'll definitely try to have you back on for part 2 so we can talk about
Absolutely. I can't wait.
King Caesar and settle this once and for all. So thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
And we'll see you next time.
Adios.
So there that was. That does it for Godzilla, part 1. We'll do part 2 probably after King Kong. I hope you enjoyed it. What is your favorite Godzilla movie? I'd like to know. I'll tell you what really I feel my favorite Godzilla movie is in part 2. So, and it's not the one that's considered to be the best, I'll tell you that. But it is one of the more serious ones. And I'll tell you this too. I almost cried during it. Almost. I didn't. Almost. So, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, that is a wrap.
Mr. Brown, that's a little too close to Mr. Shit. Are you the police?
No, man. We're musicians.
I work for Kaiser Soda.
Je me déçois énormément.
I work for Kaiser Soda.
Je me déçois énormément.
Here's the fucking money, shithead!